It cuts it down a quarter of the way.
Yeah.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the July 21st meeting of the Portsmouth Planning Board. First item on the agenda is approval of minutes. We have 3 sets. Folks had a chance to look them over.
Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion that we approve the June 16th and revised June 23rd, 2022 minutes, along with the approval of the both June 29th special meeting and joint work session minutes.
Second it.
Any discussion? Amendments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Minutes are approved. If determination of completeness for request of 230 Commerce Way LLC as owner and applicant for property at 230 Commerce Way for amended site plan review, and HCA Health Service of New Hampshire, Inc. is owner for property at 330 Borthwick Avenue for amended site plan approval for an 8,700 square foot addition. Are these determined to be complete?
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
They are accepted as complete. We have a public hearing on old business. We have next 2 items, 3A and B. We can consider, discuss together and vote on separately if there's a motion to that effect.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion on that? All those in favor?
Aye.
All right. First item is a request of Hartwell LLC as owner for property at 437 Lafayette Road, requesting preliminary and final subdivision approval to subdivide one existing lot with 65,365 square feet of lot area on 123 and 9,200 feet of frontage on Lafayette Road, and 336 and 6,100 feet of frontage on Andrew Jarvis Drive into 3 lots as follows. Proposed lot 1 with 18,434 square feet of lot area, 123 and 9,200 feet of frontage on Lafayette Road, and 129 and 5,700 feet of frontage on Andrew Jarvis Drive. Proposed lot 2 with 16,606 square feet of lot area and 102 feet and 400 frontage on Andrew Jarvis Drive. And proposed lot 3 with 30,325 square feet of lot area and 107 feet of frontage on Andrew Jarvis Drive. This property is on Assessor's Map 229, Lot 1, and is in the Single Residence B District. Who is here this evening to speak to this application?
Good evening, Chairman, members of the board. My name is Justin Masick, and I'm an engineer at TF Moran. I'm joined here tonight by Corey Caldwell of TF Moran and Joe Calderola of Smithfield Construction. Also in attendance is Derek Durbin of Durbin Law Offices, and he's available via Zoom. This project was presented at last month's planning board meeting on June 23rd and is for a proposed 3-lot subdivision located at 437 Lafayette Road, identified on tax map 229 as lot 1. The project requires subdivision and site plan review approval, as well as a conditional use permit for a proposed attached accessory dwelling unit being proposed in the single residence B zone. During last month's hearing, the board voted to continue this application and requested that the applicant address several items before returning to the board. The first request was for the applicant to meet with the abutting properties to the south of Artwell Avenue and discuss drainage plans, as well as the maintenance of the private road. And secondly, there was a request that the applicant work with the abutting church with regards to the right of first refusal over a 50-foot wide strip of land on the subject property. The existing church abuts the subject property to the east and is located at 40 Andrew Jarvis Drive. In an effort to address each of these items, the applicant has met with the aforementioned abutters over the past month in an effort to hear their concerns and better determine their needs. And he's been working actively with his attorney and the engineer to make sure we come to a resolution that satisfies all parties involved. As part of the applicant's latest submission to the planning board, there's been several items that were submitted to help address the request from the planning board. The first being a revised access and utility easement agreement between Artwell LLC and the abutting property owners to the south of Artwell Ave. This revised agreement was circulated to the abutting property owners to the south, and collectively, we took in comments, and the attorney has helped produce a revised easement agreement, and that was submitted as part of this latest submittal package. Since then, several comments from the abutters have come up, and the applicant's been working with his attorney to address these minor items, and he's working actively to finalize the document within the last week, and it's getting close to being finalized. The second item that was submitted as part of the application was a drainage memo, and that summarizes a meeting on June 23rd that was held on the subject property between the abutting property owners to the south, as well as the applicant and a representative from TF Moran. During this meeting, some of the drainage concerns that were brought up in last month's planning board meeting were discussed between the abutters and everyone else that was in attendance. And the stormwater management plan for the development was discussed in more detail. I'll briefly go over what was discussed within the drainage memo, and then I can allow Derek, who's available via Zoom, to go over some of the edits that were made in the revised access and utility easement agreement. During the site walk on June 23rd, we met with the abutters to the south of Artwell Avenue. At 36 Artwell Ave, in attendance was Butch Ritchie, and at 34 Artwell Ave was Christopher Chase. During the meeting, the applicant illustrated that the road on Artwell try to highlight where we took measurements right here at the driveway to the center of Artwell Ave on both sides, and we showed with the level that there is about a 3-inch pitch, so there's a crown in the center of the road, and the survey for this development reassures that. And essentially that means that any flows generated on the north side of Artwell Ave can impact the properties directly on the south side. Everything's going to want to run from west to east. There's a natural swale along the north side of Artwell Ave, and in proposed conditions, we'll be making that more of a conforming swale. So all the drainage from the proposed development will be collected into that swale, and then it follows the natural grade of Artwell Avenue from west to east down towards the end of the road. So through showing that illustration, we got onto the same page with the abutters that, in fact, any development that's being added on the north side of the street won't negatively impact their properties from a drainage standpoint. There is one drainage concern that was talked about at the driveway entrance right here on the center side on the south of Artwell Ave. This is a shared driveway between both of these lots, and an existing 4-inch berm was constructed because essentially water was running down the southern half of Artwell Avenue and then entering that driveway, and there was a low spot at the bottom of the driveway that had no outlet, and they had been dealing with puddling issues for the recent years. And so that 4-inch berm was constructed, which serves a purpose of keeping water out of that driveway. But the applicant had offered, as part of this development to the north, that during construction they can go in, remove that 4-inch bump, which pretty much acts as a speed hump as someone's accessing and leaving the driveway. And to alleviate that, it would just be pretty much reworking the grades to still provide a pitch away from the driveway entrance to keep that stormwater out, but it's a much more drivable in and out experience for both of those abutters. And so that was discussed in detail, and both of the abutters in attendance were in agreement that that was going to improve their current situation and appreciated the offer. And more so, the flows that are getting to that low point now are, like I said, generated on the south side of Artwell Avenue, pretty much from this portion here to the west to Lafayette. And then a portion of Lafayette actually has the ability to overflow into Artwell Ave. So they're getting a lot of flows down this. There's a curbed area in front of the lot here, and that's conveying flows, and then it was just going straight down the driveway. So even though the proposed development to the north has no negative impact on this, the applicant was still offering this to the abutter. And so In summary, towards the end of the meeting, there was verbal acknowledgement between all in attendance that the proposed development was not going to provide any negative impacts on their properties. And furthermore, we were able to show through the drainage report and the grading and drainage plan that we're abiding by the city's site plan review regulations for drainage, and we're actually providing a decrease in post-development flows and volumes. So that pretty much summarizes the drainage memo that was included as part of the submittal. And unless the board has any questions regarding this memo, I can allow Derek to jump in and touch base on the revised access and utility agreement. And he's also here to help answer any questions that might be brought up by the board from a legal stance.
Looks like we have at least one, two.
Just a couple of questions regarding the drainage. At what storm do the beehives activate the overflow beehives? Do you recall?
I know during the 2-year and the 10-year storm, I don't believe they were activated, but during the heavier storms like the 25 and the 50, they did begin to activate and then allow for more of a concentrated runoff to the swales. Are you able to bring up the grading and drainage plan, Stephanie? It's a part of the site development plan, so I think it was in the second PDF. I can just highlight some of those areas where it ends up outletting to.
Sure, and I guess to follow up on that question, so it gets into that swale. I see the grading for the swale. Are the driveways, the 3 individual driveways, also gonna, as I don't see any culverts below the driveway, so the driveway's gonna have the swale built into them? Or what keeps the water from ponding at the corner of the driveway and then jumping back onto Artwell Avenue?
Yeah, so the driveways will grade down from the house elevation and then meet Artwell Avenue, and it will follow that same swale shape, so water will be able to overflow and bypass those areas.
Okay, so the driveway will have a dip in it before you
Yes.
come up onto Artwell?
Yeah, just a
Okay.
slight dip.
Okay.
There's Jim.
Mr. Chair, yes, I have a question about the drainage swale on Lot 1. I see there's a 34 contour that swings from the property then into the Artwell right-of-way. This is probably a question for the city, but is that allowed in Portsmouth? Can you build drainage structures in for your property within the city's right-of-way?
So there's a line there, which it's actually still considered part of the overall existing lot. Artwell Avenue is owned by Artwell LLC.
Oh, okay.
And so all the impacts that you're seeing within that entire lot line, which I can highlight here, it's this shape right here along Andrew Jarvis, down Lafayette, and
Yep.
then it extends to the bottom southern half of Artwell Avenue.
Right.
So all
Yeah.
the impacts within there are
Yeah, now that I
within-
understand it's a private drive,
Yep.
all my concerns gone, so,
Okay.
thanks.
Any other questions? Did you want to have Derek
Yeah,
mention some?
I believe he's in attendance right now, and I'm not sure if you guys have to give him the ability to speak during the presentation.
Yeah, I'm on, Justin, as a panelist right now, so hopefully everybody can hear me. For the record, Derek Durbin, appearing by Zoom. Yeah, just to touch on the modifications that were made to the easement agreement that you last had before you in June. There wasn't a lot that needed to be changed, but we did respond to a few of the concerns that were expressed by the abutters on Artwell Avenue, or I should say really the existing residents of Artwell Avenue. Those concerns actually weren't terribly significant. They pertain to the restoration of Artwell Avenue after the construction has occurred on the 3 lots. And basically what Artwell LLC, the developer, agreed to do was to restore Artwell Avenue to its prior condition post-construction of those lots. So that was one of the, that was really the most significant concern that had been expressed to us that we then addressed. And then following restoration of Artwell Avenue or any damage that's done to Artwell Avenue, then the lot owners all at that point in time will be 5 lot owners, or presumably 3 different people owning the 3 different lots. But in any event, all the lot owners then would share in the responsibility of the maintenance and cost associated with Artwell Avenue.
Thank you. Any questions for the attorney? And I didn't read the second part of this that we are considering. You did present it, but the first description was so long, I neglected to read the second part. This also includes the request of Artwell LLC for the same property for site plan approval and conditional use permit approval as permitted under section 10.8.14.40 of the zoning ordinance to subdivide the lot and construct 2 single-family dwelling units, one of which will have a attached accessory dwelling unit. So that's also part of this conversation. Do you have any other part of your presentation?
No, that concluded my segment.
Thank you. This is a public hearing. I'll open up the public hearing. Anybody here wishes to speak to, for, or against this application? Anybody on Zoom? Nobody wish to speak to, for, or against this application? I'm going to close the public hearing unless somebody raises their hand. Public hearing is closed for deliberation.
Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion that we vote to grant preliminary and final subdivision approval with the following stipulations in the memo of 1.1 through 1.6.
Second.
Would you like to explain that?
Yeah, I mean, the concerns that we had last time seem to have been mostly addressed, and all of, since nobody came up to speak against it, I feel comfortable that the abutters are pleased with the additional information that they've been provided, especially on the drainage side of things, so, and the easements, so I'm happy to move the subdivision forward.
Makes sense. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I'd also make a motion that we vote to find that the application meets the requirements set forth in section 10.814.60 of the zoning ordinance and grant the conditional use permit with the following stipulations, which does include the ownership will be will be in accordance with the requirements set forth in the zoning ordinance section.
Second.
Any discussion on, or description of that one?
Yeah, my only concern on that one was to make sure that the ownership was because it's obviously not built yet, but once it's built, that one of those units must be owner occupied. That was, and we've made that our stipulation, so I'm fine with that.
Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
I will continue to make a motion that we vote to grant site plan approval with the following stipulations that are 3.1 through 3.6 for site plan review.
Second.
Would you like to explain that one?
I think that our biggest site plan issues have been addressed, which started out with the drainage and the access easement, how the private road is being maintained and managed. And since all that's been worked out, I don't have any further complications on this one in my mind, so I think we're ready to move forward.
Any other comments? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We have a public hearing on new business. Again, we have 2 items that I will try to read this time, 4A and B, if the board wishes to discuss them together.
So moved. Second.
All those in favor of considering these together?
Aye.
Opposed? We'll consider them together. So we have 2 requests, both for 230 Commerce Way LLC as owner and applicant for property at 230 Commerce Way for amended site plan review approval to construct a new 2-story building with 12,500 square feet of footprint and a total of 25,000 square feet of associated site improvements, including lighting, utilities, stormwater treatment management systems. Property is found in Assessor's Map 216, Lot 1-5, and is in the Office Research District. In addition, the same 230 Commerce Way LLC is owner and applicant. Is requesting a wetlands conditional use permit under section 10-1017 of the zoning ordinance for installation of a treated stormwater drainage outfall, removal of 5,070 square feet of impervious surface and 9,250 square feet of buffer enhancements within the 100-foot buffer area for associated construction outside the buffer area. Same property, map 216, lot 1-5. Who is here to speak to this application?
Good evening, Neil Hansen with Ty and Bonds. Also here with the project team is Patrick Crimmins from Ty and Bonds and Kelsey Kraus representing the owner and applicant. So we were before the planning board back in February for conceptual consultation for this project. And this project was also in front of the ZBA back in February and was granted a special exception for the proposed vet use that is part of this project. So the proposed project site is at 230 Commerce Way. The existing property consists of a 3-story office building up along Commerce Way and then a large, seldom used parking lot to the rear. So this proposed site plan includes the construction of a 2-story, approximately 12,000 square foot vet office in the rear of this parking lot, along with the reconfiguration of the parking layout in the rear. The biggest change from this site plan from when we were here previously for conceptual consultation is, if you'll remember, we had a secondary driveway that we had connected out to Portsmouth Boulevard, and through consultation with you folks and the Conservation Commission, we have removed that from the plan. Go to the next sheet, please. So part of this proposal includes the construction of a stormwater treatment system on the site. The existing parking lot from about a high point, which is kind of in the midpoint of the site here, sheet flows to the rear directly into the wetland without any stormwater treatment. So this proposed project will collect and treat all the stormwater runoff from the project area through a stormwater filtration system. There's also in the rear, this existing parking lot is within the 100-foot wetland buffer, which is why we are also requesting the wetland conditional use permit. So this will remove approximately 5,000 square feet of impervious surface from the wetland buffer. So I'll get into the wetland conditional use permit piece. Could you pull up the wetland buffer exhibit? It's in a separate PDF. Oh, okay. Yeah. Well, there it is. Thank you. So in your package was this exhibit showing the existing impacts of the within the wetland buffer, which is shown on the left here in the dark green hatching. And then on the right is we're proposing to do some wetland buffer restoration, so of over 9,000 square feet. So that'll be in the area where we're moving the existing pavement, as well as where the new drainage outfall is going. We'll be restoring that area with a wetland buffer seed mix, and then some additional plantings along the existing tree lines, some trees and shrubs to enhance that area. So within the cover letter, we had gone through the 6 criteria for the granting of a conditional use permit. I don't know if I need to specifically go through all of those. We did receive a unanimous recommendation of approval from the Conservation Commission with a couple stipulations, and those stipulations were addressed as part of this final submission. As well as we had received a number of stipulations from TAC when they recommended approval, and those were also addressed as part of the submission package. And with that, I'll answer any questions you might have.
Any questions for the applicant? Jane?
Yeah, I had a couple. In your demolition plan on point number 15, you talk about removing trees as part of, in order to proceed with construction, but it's not really much more specific than that. So I was just wondering, when you're planting these trees in the 9,250 square foot wetland buffer area that you're restoring, is it a net zero? Is there a net gain in trees and, you know, size of mature trees? What happens in terms of trees?
So we're not, the only area where we're actually removing any vegetation is in this narrow strip here where the stormwater discharge is gonna be going. So for the majority of the site, we're not removing any of the existing vegetation that's sort of around the perimeter of the site. So I don't have an exact count, but I would say we're probably right about net even on trees, just given that the limited amount of cutting we actually have to do for the construction work.
Okay, and when you say net zero, you mean so mature trees are replaced with mature trees, and it's not like mature trees?
I don't know specifically what is in that area we are cutting, as far as mature trees goes.
I just think point 15 should be a little bit more specific then, because it's so open-ended. I don't have that page up in front of me right now, but it's open-ended and not very specific about that.
I mean, that's more of a general note about the removal of stumps and trees to be done in accordance with state
Yeah.
and federal law. It's not really project-specific.
And then, did you guys do a parking demand analysis of any kind?
Yes, so on the site plan, we have the parking calcs for the site. So we just used the City of Portsmouth's parking regulations for the site. And we require 193 spaces, and we're providing 202, and that is for the combined use of the existing office building and the new veterinary building.
I mean, since it's a two-story new building and it's described as veterinary care, I'm just curious, does that include like a hospital, emergency, I don't know, crisis, emergencies?
Yeah, there is emergency care within the vet, yes.
So, but it's not increasing the parking demand very much, even though, like, what will be the opening hours? Will it be 24/7, some part of that building?
I don't, yes, it'll be 24/7. So the reason we're able to fit this building on this site is because the amount of parking that's currently there is way more than is needed for the office use. So we're able to put this building on this site and still have enough parking spaces per the city's regulations.
And then my last question is actually about dog waste stations. I do see that you guys put in, you know, like, dog walking areas both on the patient side and just for the public.
Yes.
But what about in that parking area? Because it looks like,
So.
I don't know, can you explain about the lawn area that's like,
So
is it
within
cordoned
the
off?
rear of the site here, so closest to the vet use, these new islands are gonna be pretty heavily landscaped. So, ideally, people bringing their pets will use the designated area for that. And then again, as you noted, there's a separate, pet relief area for the, staff to take out the animals that are, currently there. One of the stipulations of the Conservation Commission is they asked us to sign the wetland buffer,
That- okay.
noting the buffer and also
saw that.
indicating to pets were not allowed to.
Okay,
So that's in an effort to keep animals out of that restored area.
yeah. Okay, thank you.
Any other questions for the applicant? Just Jim.
Yes, I have a question really on just how this site ended up with so much extra parking. Did the land use change, or was there a proposed taller building that so much parking was built? It was just a mystery.
You know the history of the site? I mean, I would just imagine that it was, I don't know when it was originally developed, but there was, yeah, I mean, I think in that time it was cram as much parking onto the site as you could, get,
Okay.
and,
All right, it makes sense. It was just odd that for years, like you said, there was acres of vacant parking, and that's a lot of money to build it, for not to use it, and now we are, so I guess
yeah.
that's,
But I'm not entirely sure of the history of why.
all right, thanks.
Have you worked with the DPW about the fair share dedication on the pedestrian multi-use path?
Yeah, I think we've had initial conversations with them. The ownership they're looking for some historic documentation on the site, and they're planning on continuing to work with the city on figuring out that fair share. And I think it was noted as a recommended stipulation in their,
That's,
their,
yeah, it was
it's
noted.
fine, acceptable, yeah.
So it's still a little bit more to do.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, staff's requesting that item, that stipulation, I think I sent you a note earlier, be added. We think that is ongoing still and that we'd like to add that
Yep.
to the stipulations, yeah.
Any other questions for the applicant? Being none, I will open the public hearing. Anybody here or on Zoom wish to speak to, for, or against this application? Nobody on Zoom? Last call. Close the public hearing. Board deliberation.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion that we find the application meets the criteria set forth in 10.1017.50 and to grant the wetland conditional use permit as presented.
Second.
There is one, as the planning director said, there was one additional stipulation, attack comment, that the applicant will work with the DPE to determine fair share contribution, the amount to be dedicated to pedestrian multi-use path construction on Market Street, which we just discussed. So just one more thing to add into the list.
Into the notes.
Should that be under site plan?
Is that under 2, the site plan, or is that under the conditional use permit?
It would be under 2 site plan.
Good, that's where I put it. The motion and the second, okay with that small addition?
We're just voting on,
We're on number 1 first. We need to vote on number 1 first.
Oh, I'm sorry. I put under site plan, but we're not there yet, okay. So, we have a motion and a second on the wetlands conditional use permit. All those in favor?
aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now, site plan.
Mr. Chairman, I make a motion we vote to grant site plan approval with the following conditions, 2.1 through 2.8 into addition as noted regarding the multi-use path.
Second.
Any discussion?
I think they did a good job coming back with everything we asked for from the last meeting.
I think so. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much. We have one more application where we have 2 from the same landowner. We can consider these together if the board so chooses.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We will consider these together. 2 requests of HCA Health Service of New Hampshire, I assume that's just supposed to be incorporated, as owner for property located at 333 Borthwick Avenue, requesting an amended site plan approval for an 8,700 square foot addition to the existing building with associated landscaping, utilities, and sidewalk connectivity with other related site work. This property is on Assessor Map 240, Lot 2-1, and is in the Office Research District. In addition, this same property for HCA Health Service of New Hampshire is requesting a wetlands conditional use permit approval under section 10.10.17 of the zoning ordinance for 200 square feet of permanent and 4,400 square feet of temporary impact to the inland wetland, with 13,000 square feet of permanent and 4,300 square feet of temporary impact to the 100-foot buffer area for the associated expansion of hospital facilities. Again, it's Assessor's Map 240, Lot 2-1, and is in the Office Research District. Who's here to speak to this application?
Good evening. Good evening. My name is Matthew Hamby. I am a civil engineer with Kimley Horn, who worked on the site plan portion of this project. With me is Chris Dumont, who is the project architect, who can speak to any of the building elements or programming inside the building. As stated, we are here for HCA Healthcare and Portsmouth Regional Hospital, seeking a site plan amendment and a wetland conditional use permit for the 8,700 square foot building addition. This building addition is a fully horizontal expansion, is going to be a cancer treatment facility, which will be a new program to Portsmouth Regional Hospital that the facility is excited to offer the community. With this site plan, that we have been to the Board of Adjustments for a building setback adjustment from a 50-foot standard to a 40-foot standard, which was approved. We've been to the Conservation Commission for the wetland buffer encroachment as well as a permanent wetland encroachment. They had some stipulations in which we have satisfied and resubmitted as part of this planning board submission. And I believe we did get recommendation for approval from the planning board. And lastly, we've been through TAC, the Technical Review Committee, and we have satisfied their comments with this planning board submission. So like, as stated, the first things we're encroaching the wetlands. We're removing 200 square feet of permanent wetland, but we are establishing 1,150 square feet of new wetland. So it's a net increase of almost 1,000 square feet of wetland. That pond was actually a man-made pond when the hospital was originally constructed. And that pond volume is being increased by 2,000 cubic feet to help attenuate the 2 through 100 year storm events. There's also part of this project is a new mobile MRI unit that's more on the rear end of the hospital near the ED. It will have a small retaining wall to hold it up. A mobile MRI unit is basically a tractor trailer with an MRI unit inside of it in the event that the hospital needs to service their MRI. So that will just be a concrete pad that will be infrequently used by the facility when the time is needed. We are removing 15 parking spaces, 4 of which are ADA. We're adding back 8 total spaces, 6 of those which are ADA, which will be new concrete spaces near the patient discharge. We are reworking that canopy. It's existing today, but they're gonna tear it off and rebuild it to make it a more functional entrance for the cancer center entryway. That is kind of the history of where we've been in the site planning schematic thus far. Open to any questions that the planning board may have.
Any questions of the applicant?
It's certainly in here, but do you want to just highlighting the relocation of the public utility lines, the water line and the fire line there?
Yeah, so the utilities are serviced off of Borthwick today. They enter, see how I use it.
Top button, hold it down.
Oh, there we go. So it enters right here where the sidewalk meets the existing building. And so that connects, it actually routes through the wetlands, which is part of the Conservation Commission encroachment that we requested. So that will be maintained. That's the main feed to the hospital. So we're just, those are all private utilities at that point. So the contractor is going to pick that water line up and route it around the new footer and then tie it back into the existing, we call it a riser room, which is where like the fire pump lives that services the hospital. And then the fire line, as part of the ICU project 2 years ago, we needed to get a fire department connection and FDC closer to that hydrant. And so we rerouted it around the wetlands. And that was one of the comments from the TAC. There was confusion on if, is that a public fire line? And we revised the drawings to show that that's a private, I believe it's a 4-inch, we call it a dry system. So fire truck would connect to the hydrant, connect to that, and it would surcharge the sprinkler system inside the building. So that again is just a private utility that feeds the existing fire suppression system.
Any other? Yes, Jane.
Yeah, I'd just like to ask for clarity, again, about how how the design accounts for the quote, filling of a portion of the pond by expanding the pond. Can you just go over what happens to the footprints of the ponds?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a colored exhibit in our package, probably 10 sheets down or something. That may help. Color makes everything easier for me, so it might make it easier for staff.
Because there's some.
Yeah, go to the pond impact plan, I'm sorry.
Pond modification example B.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah, so yeah, the orange, so if you can tell the notching, right, that's the building outer limits. So the orange is currently pond. This basin's analyzed in 2 ways. It's analyzed as a wetland, and it's also analyzed as a true detention pond that attenuates our storm events. So in this case, this was for the pond. So when you talk about a pond, you talk about volume, not really think about it 3D wise. We removed a small portion of volume there, but we have pulled the contours up and wrapped them, and this is where we picked up the additional volume. So the way that you read that, we're filling in a portion of the orange and we're digging it out in the blue, if that makes sense. So imagine digging that out and then putting it there. But we're actually increasing the pond volume by 2,000 square feet. So or cubic feet, excuse me. So there should be 2,000 cubic feet more of blue on this exhibit than there would be orange. If that makes sense.
And you're doing it because of something about oxygen tanks?
No,
Why-
that was
why
a
are you
different.
doing it? Let me
Why are
just-
we doing that? Because we're just for the way that pond is modeled and what it was sized for originally when the hospital was built. We don't want to add. We don't want to take away the storage because that would cause flooding downstream. So we want to hold the same amount of water that's holding today, and we're actually increasing it by 2,000 cubic.
But it's for purposes of stormwater retention.
Exactly. You got
Got you.
it. Yep,
Okay.
you got it.
And then just as an aside, is there any bird life on these ponds that are going to be
No.
adversely affected?
No, well, we've had environmental studies and there's been nothing that's come up on that. We are we are doing a planting plan for the newly established wetlands, and we are providing, I think they're chokeberries, which have a berry that would provide food for wildlife of
Yeah.
that type of nature, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
So with the criteria for the CUP in wetlands, you're putting a building in wetlands and you're putting a slab in wetlands. So how did you go through the analysis that there's no better place for the slab for the mobile MRI and there's no way you can build your building without not going in the wetlands?
So so as far as the programming and the location of the addition, is that kind of what you're?
Well, basically, those criteria for
Sure,
encroaching
sure,
on
sure.
wetlands says you can't build in them
Sure.
unless there's no other place to build.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris, do you want to talk about the programming of the building and how it ties into the existing program of the hospital?
Sure, at the point, my name's Chris Dumont,
Come to the mic, microphone.
apologies. Name's Chris Dumont, work for Gould Turner, the architect for the hospital. Basically, Patrick, please, please chime in on this.
Well, first thing,
The hospital has basically the lot that they're on, they basically ran out of space to actually build on. That's not either has setbacks for wetlands or property setbacks and all. This is basically really the last one, unless they want to go in the back, which is up against 95. So this was the and then they also have the power line. They also have the big, large utility power lines, which there's an easement there. They can't even build on that. And the front of it, it's all parking. And after that easement, it's
How much parking do you have based on the requirements? It seems to me, looking at this, that's the best plan you got right there. Why couldn't you move the building and the pad north? Down,
rotated, yeah.
down. If I'm looking at the compass rose in the top question, yeah, move it down, which appears to be north by the compass rose.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, the way the sheet oriented. So I guess a couple things. There's existing outpatient, like I mentioned earlier, there's a canopy there that's not been used. We were there to staff exit only. And so the opportunity to repurpose that to be a cancer center entry, drop off and pick up patients was important. So that location for the cancer treatment facility is one of the main reasons it is where it is. And then as far as the reason for it encroaching into the wetland, you can speak to this. That has a linear accelerator in it, which is a cancer treatment vault, and it's 50 by 50.
the vault needs to be to keep the radiation within the vault. We needed 50 feet clear from the existing building out.
Okay, but that's east and west. So back to my original question. If you moved the building and the pad into the parking lot, would you still have enough parking for the hospital?
So you're saying build it out here.
No, build it this way, down.
This is existing structure, sorry.
Yep, I know, but say, take the two brown things and move them north. Right there.
Is that part?
That's part of the Can we go back to the site plan? I mean, unless you think this is,
Is there a building there or parking lot?
Building.
Oh, I'm
this is,
sorry.
this
I'm
is
sorry.
all hospital. Sorry.
If there's
The
a
parking-
building,
The only parking lot is out front
Alright.
of the hospital.
sorry.
Okay, sorry,
My-
no,
my
you're
mistake.
good, you're good. We should have probably done a better job of, again, color.
Well, that
That
particular,
big white thing is the existing, yeah, 500,000 square foot hospital.
Sorry.
Yes, we should have made it more clear.
got it.
The diagonal line across that plan is your right, the power line easement,
That's
correct?
the power line easement.
And
yes.
you can't go into that.
That's correct.
Correct.
What are the programmatic constraints inside the building? I mean, there's a reason you put it where you put it. I assume that's where you gotta put it. Is that,
Yeah, I mean, that's what I was trying to say. There is no other, at this time, at this time, there is no other really space that the hospital has to put this program on their campus.
Certainly, there are features inside of the hospital that require it to be at a very specific location as well for patient flow and availability of services and so forth.
The component that's in there now is radiology, and what makes it very convenient for a cancer center is to have the radiology department next to it.
A linear accelerator addition is a very complicated thing. It is, yeah, it's tough.
I mean, did we like where we put it?
Yeah.
No, there wasn't many other locations on their site to place this addition.
yes, Peter?
So parking, I've been to the hospital recently for some testing, and I noticed that the lot was full. There was really nowhere to park hardly at all. It looks like you're looking to expand access or more cars to come. Is there any change in the available parking that's going to be there afterwards?
Yes, our good friends at Time Bond are designing a 500 parking space remote lot for hospital staff across Borthwick, which I will probably get presented on soon, August.
We expect that to come forward in August.
Yeah, so that will be, I know the hospital is super excited, and so is the community.
It wasn't quite ready this month.
Should be a stipulation.
Yeah.
It is
It's in your tabulation, though. Is that,
Yes, sir, yeah, we accounted for it, yes, sir.
Thank you.
any other questions? Yes, Jim?
Getting back to what Mr. Mahana was talking about, alternatives, is there any reason this couldn't have gone up as far as build this addition vertically instead of horizontally?
Easement.
That's architectural, yeah.
The previous project, I'm sorry, the previous project for the hospital was an ICU, which is on this, which is located on this whole area of the hospital. Structurally, they could only handle a second floor. So that area of that roof has already been occupied for an expansion already. Due to structural, if not, then they would have had to remove what was built and redo the structure again.
Okay, well, I'm sure you're as familiar with the property as everyone else is. You're right, it's surrounded by wetlands pretty much 100%. And if Portsmouth Hospital has any future expansion, I think vertically is the only option you're gonna have. So,
I totally understand.
I didn't know if this thing was super heavy, was this particle,
The weight of a linear accelerator and the magnet inside is
Yeah, we can't put
structurally, yeah.
that program of the cancer center. It needs to either be below grade or on grade.
okay, that makes sense.
Any other questions of the applicant? On either part of the application? No other questions? We'll open the public hearing. Public hearing is open. Is anybody here to speak to, for, or against this application? Anybody on Zoom? Very peaceful evening. Last call. Nobody here to speak? Gonna close the public hearing. Board's deliberation.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we vote to find that the application meets the criteria set forth in 10.1017.50 and to grant the wetland conditional use permit as presented.
Second.
Would you like to discuss that, Corey?
Sure. I mean, as we were just discussing, this is not a good location for a hospital, given that the entire road, parking lot, building, everything is in wetlands. So, moving forward, how do we, make things work? I think the applicant did a good job explaining the constraints with the structure, the structural constraints of the addition, with the equipment going inside. Just looking at the site plan, obviously, they have that power line right away that you can't do any building within that footprint, and then you have the actual wetland buffer setbacks. I know that they are encroaching into a man-made wetland, hence no wetland buffer mapped on that one. But I think by expanding the pond, doing what they can to keep the volume where it is, also the plantings as well, is going to help mitigate any impacts that they have by expanding into the pond.
Thank you. Yes, Greg.
Question, comment that I'm not sure anybody here can answer, but the difference between a man-made wetland and a non-man-made wetland. It's great that they're actually creating more wetlands that were previously created. Is there, and I'm in favor of that, but if it's an existing non-man-made wetland, we're not allowed to build it unless there's no place else to build. So is there a difference between a man-made wetland and I guess it's called a jurisdictional wetland in my experience, that is a...
Would you care to address that, Beverly, or?
I only can go by the notes that the applicant provided, which essentially they state that this is not a jurisdictional wetland, but actually a stormwater wetland.
Okay.
Is what they've called it, and maybe they can give us sort of more details about the difference between the two and how the distinctions are made.
Not now.
Oh, sorry. I guess that won't be.
No, but
That's all I
but
have
Beverly,
is what-
that's actually helpful, because I
Yeah.
know jurisdictional wetlands are
Yeah.
existing
Yeah.
natural wetlands, and this is a pond that
This
was
is
created.
a stormwater wetland is what it's described as. Mhm.
And they're increasing it, not decreasing it, and it's not like it has natural habitat for frogs or something. I'm just trying to get comfortable with the fact that they're making it bigger, but they are building in it. If anybody else has comments to help me with that.
Yeah, I guess my trying to
Experience.
explain it is this pond was built for stormwater purposes. It didn't have, when it was first built, there was no forethought into plantings or bottom habitat or anything of that nature. In fact, it's likely if they were looking into building the pond, they were trying to actually increase drainage infiltration in the bottom of the pond. So once again, they were looking for sandy soils, that sort of thing. And this kind of goes back to the when Sandy was here discussing with us about mitigation. And one thing that I think folks have seen time and time again, protecting natural wetlands is the best thing you can do. Whenever someone tries to go in and build a new wetland, more often than not, it fails. It doesn't, the end result isn't what everybody wanted, and it just ends up being, once again, some sort of man-made feature that kind of works,
An
but not
ugly gr-
nearly as good as a
An
natural.
ugly green pond with algae in it.
Yeah, exactly. Not nearly as good as a natural pond. I mean, certainly it certainly has value for sure, and that's why it is still mapped as a wetland. But it's it's not as good as, at least from what I'm not a wetland scientist or anything, but from what I understand, it doesn't have the same ecological value as a natural pond. So that's why it's treated a little
My point of the
differently.
discussion was to get us all comfortable with the concept.
It was built to detain stormwater.
Exactly, so it wasn't a wetland before, it sort of kind of became a wetland, but by definition, because the definition is vague, it's not a jurisdictional wetland.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
And because it's man-made, they're just basically moving it.
And they're doing a good job of that, that's fine, but it's a wetland.
Created.
I'm fine, thanks.
That's why they're asking for a permit.
Yeah.
exactly.
Andrew, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I just had I suppose a comment, but I'll preface it by saying I don't quite entirely understand the electrical easement and what the constraints are there. But having now heard that there will be additional parking across the street, would it ever be a consideration to look into the existing parking lot and reorienting the existing entry off of Borthwick and then constructing more east to west rather than north to south in this regard? So kind of closer to the existing parking lot now and then putting a new building or new structure over that way?
I think if you look at the sheet C401, you can see how the building steps and just touches but doesn't go across that
Sure.
line. That's their restriction. They can't go into that with a building.
Yeah, I suppose I was thinking if it were two separate buildings, but having heard their reasoning and logic, I certainly get it. But to any extent that that was not the case, would we be looking at structures on that existing parking lot was my thought, but I think it's since been answered.
Big negotiation with the power company.
Yeah, I won't raise my hand for that one.
Probably wouldn't work. So we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Approve the conditional use permit for the wetlands. We now have a site plan.
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion that we vote to grant amended site plan approval of the following stipulations, 2.1 through 2.8 as presented in the staff memo.
Second.
Would you like to explain that one, Corey?
Sure. Once again, I think they, obviously, they have to comply with a lot of ADA items, seeing that it is a hospital. So I think the reconfiguration of the entranceway there, and as we previously discussed, everything has to be first floor anyways. And then also the mobile unit, trying to basically, what's the best location to get that mobile unit in there while still being able to easily move it when necessary. I think the site as shown works.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Aye.
Motion carries. We have another public hearing on new business, request of Lanson and Sophie LaChance as owner and applicant for property at 11 Fletcher Street, requesting a conditional use permit for approval under 10-10-17 of the zoning ordinance for the installation of a stormwater underdrain outlet, creating 140 square feet of permanent impact within the 100-foot wetland buffer. This property is shown on Assessor's Map 233, Lot 76-1, and is in the Signal Residence B District.
I will be recusing on this one, Chairman.
Thank you. Andrew, you disappeared? Oh, there you are. Corey is recusing himself. Will you sit for this one?
Yes.
Who's here to speak to this application?
I am. I'm Alex Ross. I prepared the site plans that were submitted. I'm here with the owner, Lanson LaChance. So this is actually a very simple project that involves a tiny bit of work in the wetland buffer. So there's no disturbance in the wetlands at all. It's just in the wetland buffer. And if we could turn to the site photos. So on the first sheet of the site photos, this parcel is at the end of Fletcher Street. So you can see that's boxed out in this first sheet. And then the next street down is Benson. If we could go to the next sheet. So this is a view looking down towards Benson. And the natural grade out there slopes down towards Benson and then out towards the woodland wetlands. So that's what we're here about today. There's actually no wetlands on this parcel, but the 100-foot buffer does come across the parcel. So if we could go to our site plans. I guess, on the first sheet. So this is the existing conditions plan. And way down here in the lower left is where the wetlands are. We delineated the wetlands down there. So you can see the 100-foot buffer cuts across here in the parcel. Also, you can see there's an existing house down here fairly close to the wetlands, which is on Benson, the next street down. And because of the configuration and location of all that, it's a sensitive area where the wetland buffer and wetlands should be protected. If we could go to the next sheet. So this is our site plan. And what you can see down in this corner is where we have a small drain outlet. So it's really going to be similar to a foundation drain daylighting at the rear of the site. We did meet with DPW and walk this site, and they're very particular about where they wanted this drainage outfall. Originally, we did want to keep everything out of the 100-foot buffer because a CUP is required. But DPW kind of directed and recommended to us that they would like this drain line in that corner. We also met with the Conservation Commission and reviewed this area. They did want a planting plan. So if we can go to the next sheet. So this is our landscape plan. We came up with 8 trees kind of up the slope and then down in that flatter corner area, a lot of shrub plantings around this drainage outfall. So it's a very small disturbance, typically on a residential lot like this. It's not given this thorough a review, but because of the wetlands that are off-site, DPW, Conservation Commission wanted these plantings, wanted these measures in place. We also did prepare a drainage study. We submitted that to DPW. So that involves pervious pavement, a rain garden, infiltration areas, and roof gutters. So again, the only reason we're here tonight is just this small outfall in this corner. It's not in the wetlands, but there's a little bit of work in the wetland buffer. So we'd be happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions, the applicant? Yes.
Have you had discussions with that house that you can see in that last photograph you showed us as far as drainage onto their property and whether or not there's any issues there, or have any, if there are any issues, have those been addressed?
Yeah, so that's a good point. If we can go back to the site plan, this house down here on Benson is kind of in a low-lying area, and I think that's why all this came about. That owner has had previous concerns where she calls the town or DPW. So because of that, DPW was very aware that we want to avoid any kind of outfall that makes a drainage path directly towards that house or that parcel. So that's why they pushed this over in this corner, which by the contours gives a more direct path towards these wetlands in the rear.
Great, thank you.
Along those same lines, I was wondering, I usually don't ask about mulch, but because of the grade of the land, I mean, can it be expected that this mulch could run, you know, into the wetlands or into that neighbor's property? And is that mulch, does it meet some kind of standards of the New Hampshire Landscape Association, or what kind of mulch is it, so that it doesn't destroy the wetlands or that sort of thing? I
Sure.
kind of don't understand. I understand why you have mulch around trees, but could you maybe just start with elucidating why you have mulch around these shrubs on a grade?
Sure, yeah, and if we can go to the next sheet. So the mulching would just be down in this area where the shrubs are. And you do have a good point. So on a steep slope, you do have to be careful. Actually, in that green area, it really becomes much more level. So up above that would be where the trees are. So there wouldn't be mulch up there.
But you have mulch around the trees, too.
Yeah, so just around the direct planting of the tree.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and that, the mulching would be 2 to 3 inches thick. And it's there to give stabilization and try to keep moisture and infiltration in the soil.
I'm still concerned that the mulch be of an organic material that meets current standards for this sort of thing, so that it doesn't further pollute the wetlands should we have a rain event that brings it, you know, down in closer or into the wetlands in particular.
Sure. So in this corner area, there will be a silt sock kind of at the edge of construction. Also, with the Conservation Commission, they did recommend that we put notes on the plan for Northeast Organic Farming Association. So we could add some notes that the mulching has to be native, organic, non-invasive, you know. But it's a very small amount of mulch, and it shouldn't have any impact on the wetlands.
Well, what is the square feet area of that green area? Approximately, like,
Yeah, I can measure that up.
I see it in the Conservation Commission stipulations that you will follow NOFA standards for land care management, so maybe that does cover this.
Yeah, and that green area is about 400 square feet.
400, okay. Okay, thank you.
Yes, Jim?
Yeah, Mr. Ross, I'm curious as to, you mentioned that Portsmouth DPW had a large say in the location of this outfall of the underdrain.
Yes.
But is all private utilities on this property, correct? Is there any city-owned assets?
So for this parcel, the house will tie into city sewer and
Oh,
city
will,
water.
Okay, all right.
Yep.
So that makes sense of why they have particulars about where it discharges. So the owner really didn't have a choice of where they can put this drain then?
No.
Okay, thanks.
Is the drain just for the foundation, or is it for the catch basin that's under the deck as well?
Yeah, so that drain collects all the drainage. So foundation drain, there's an under drain under the pervious pavers for the driveway.
But you're not putting more water off-site post-development than you are pre-development?
No, there's actually a decrease in the rate of runoff. You know, because there's so many measures on this site with a rain garden, with the pervious pavers, with infiltration areas.
I can see the rain garden, just the rain garden's in a different spot, so that's why I was wondering what was going into this location. Any other questions for the applicant? There being none, I will open up the public hearing. Public hearing is open. Anybody wish to speak to, for, or against this application? Is anybody on Zoom? There is. And we have somebody here as well. Okay. Ma'am, you stepped up first.
Good evening, Chairman, members of the board. I'm Judy Pope. I'm the owner of the house that's downstream off of the Green Corner. So a little history going back. April of 2020 was the very first meeting for combining this lot, which led to the creation of the address 11 Fletcher Street with the stipulation that before any building permit can be issued, that there needed to be a runoff and drainage plan that was approved by DPW and the planning board. Those original owners consequently sold the house to the lot to the LaChances, and that stipulation carried forward. So thank you, because I have a vested interest in not having additional water come down to my property. For anybody that was on the board back in April 2020, I think we showed that we have very high visible water tables when there are significant storms because of the way the drainage is there. Comes down through the center of my property. There is a culvert that goes underneath Benson Street to the other side where there is an open swale, or I think you call it a natural swale, that hits over to the wetlands. So when that gets backed up, DPW gets calls because we're going underwater. So that's probably part of the reason they had a vested interest in where this drainage went. So again, I appreciate you carrying that forward. And I appreciate that we're going to have this plan in place. My questions are just around to having maybe the same kind of stipulation that if something changes again with the building, that this approval of because there was a original house plan that the first owners had that has changed with I understand, or I believe has changed with the next owners who followed through and got this wonderful plan put in place. So I would say that I would ask that in the event the lot sells again before this house is built, that stipulation please carry forward. Also, just kind of like, kind of safety measures for myself. What if the house gets framed, but construction stops and the drainage hasn't been put in place? Now there's this significant pitch that we have on that lot with water coming down, downhill to my lot. Additionally, what if the design of the house changes during the construction, and the collection area is a rain garden, I think it is, and there's roofing that changes that could perhaps change the location of that. What measures are in place to make sure that this drainage plan follows suit? And then also, what measures are in place to make sure that this gets fully executed upon? I have, obviously a vested interest. My house is 100 years old. It does have a sump and a pump. And for the 10 years that I lived there, I rent it out now, the sump was a place where cobwebs and spiders lived only, and it was always dry. Now that the trees are down, you start to see a difference in water table, and the pump actually has to be activated now and again. So also, the other thing with the way Benson Street is, it crowns right in the center. So we get all the water that comes down Sims Ave, turns the corner, and flows down Benson Street. So when you get that crown, we just have streams on either side. And you know, pools in my driveway. Well, sometimes you need boots.
Thank you.
Are you, I'm sorry, are you at 66 Benson? I'm just-
66
okay,
Benson,
thank you,
yes.
Thank you. I see it here.
Anybody else wish to speak to, for, or against?
Sorry. I'm Angela Lambert. I'm actually at 65 Benson, so I'm at the bottom. I get all the water that she doesn't get. It all comes to me, and I get the culvert. So I want to thank Mr. Ross. It sounds like they've got a great plan in place, and it sounds like this might actually help us. Judy and I just both are like, we just want to make sure it doesn't make our water worse, because when they did take all those trees down, because it is a sloped hill, you know, that was our concern at the meeting 2 years ago, was that we just don't want to have more water, because when the culvert gets filled, if it's, I don't know, somebody blocks it or something, the culvert can like raise to street level. And DPW does know us well because of that issue. You know, we've called them and said, we can't, the water's flowing over into the street because we get it all. So it just sounds like this is a plan that might help us. We just want to make sure it's not going to make things worse. So, thank you.
Thank you.
If I could address and clarify some of the concerns, it's my understanding, if the planning board approves this tonight, then we'd also need a formal approval from DPW, which I'm assuming would refer to the plan as presented with a date, which would then go towards the building permit. So if any kind of house design or drainage design changes, it would kind of have to go back to square one, or at least to DPW, for this thorough review, so.
I don't know that's the case, is that?
So it's my understanding that Public Works has reviewed it. If the house, we could make that a stipulation. It's not currently a stipulation, and so that would not be typical, not for the building permit. So I don't believe that is part of the process for a single-family structure. It is kind of unusual for Public Works to review a drainage plan for a single-family structure. In this case, they did. If it was stipulation that should the plan change from what was approved, that it would require additional Public Works review, that certainly can be a stipulation of this board. But I don't believe, and it's not, certainly I don't see it in the stipulations, that it would be something that is typically not required, and it wouldn't be required unless you ask for it.
We have Chris Gollett on Zoom.
Hello, this is Chris Gallett, owner of 10 Fletcher across the street. I'm speaking in favor of the plan presented tonight. It looks like they've done all their research and have really taken into consideration the concerns presented for the Brodricks, for the previous owners.
Thank you. Is there anybody else on Zoom or here that would like to speak to, for, or against this application? Seeing none, I'm going to close the public hearing. Public hearing is closed.
Mr. Chair, I'd make a motion that we vote to find the application meets the criteria set forth in 10.1017.50 and to grant the conditional use permit with the following stipulations: that they follow the NOFA standards as written, and that if there are any changes to the structure on the property that should possibly change drainage, that it goes back for a DPW review to make sure it stays consistent with our approval.
Second.
I think that was explained, but if you'd like to explain it further.
Yeah, I mean, I remember 2 years ago when this first came to us and all of the concerns that were there, which is one of the reasons why I asked a little bit further about the drainage. I think DPW has done a really good job of trying to really create almost a rock drain, French drain is what I've always called them, kind of scenario where it will aim all of the water going into set locations. So I trust the engineers have done their due diligence, and I think it's a good plan. We just want to make sure it stays there.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, Jim.
I was wondering if there's a way that we can address one of the speaker's concerns about, say the project's half-built and the drainage is not constructed. And so they have this, half-built situation and a drainage problem. Can we bond this, or somehow is there surety that once they start building that it will be completed?
So I typically would not recommend bonding for this type of private, usually we bond for public infrastructure to ensure that public health safety are met should the project not be finished. But for a private site, we might require that the site be stabilized during the construction period, with silt fencing and silt socks and I know that the applicant's representative did speak to that. It certainly is something that if it does arise, and we do often get calls, we would go out to the site and require that they go ahead and stabilize the site. That could be a requirement, that they take adequate provisions to stabilize the site during the construction period. And should there be any questions raised to that, we often go out to double check sites. So that would be a stipulation that could be also added if they have not already addressed that fully.
Yeah, I understand that bonding would be very unusual for a private site. I just didn't know if, worst case scenario, you have a half-built, abandoned, framed up house, and it could be years. But if you think that can be addressed without bonding, then I'll go with that.
I think it could be that, that they take adequate provisions to stabilize the site during the construction period. And I think that would be a more appropriate way of addressing.
The worst case scenario happened about 3 hours ago. That kind of a storm. Yes.
Yeah, along the topic of stabilization, given that what we just heard from two neighbors about, the increase in water flow towards their houses, given the slope, given the fact that they've taken so many trees down, I'm wondering if we can stipulate that the plantings will be bigger than, they're saying that the circumference, if that's what C is 3 to 3.5 inches for these maple trees, et cetera. So in order to be able to take root, to stabilize that land faster, can we stipulate that bigger sized plantings occur?
If I can speak to that, we could. It is a single-family residence, and the engineering calculations that have been done aren't relying on those trees taking any of that water. So I think it would be a burdensome condition.
So just for clarification, are you saying that this drain alone not even with the shrubs, because shrubs won't have grown, but the drain alone should prevent that kind of rushing of water as soon as that's put in?
Once the site is stabilized. The question, as planning director was saying, as the site is opened up for construction and there's no vegetation at all on it, and it's just dirt, that's when you have to have protections in place for runoff.
It's just that some of this problem was caused by taking down all of these trees to begin with. But yes, I understand that, this drainage is probably very well designed, et cetera. But aesthetically and every other which way, including stabilizing a slope, it seems to me like we might want to stipulate bigger trees. It's 3.5 inches circumference. Couldn't we just stipulate? Well, I don't know. See, engineering-wise, landscape engineering-wise, I don't know what size we would stipulate that would grow at a good rate, that would really help stabilize the runoff from that land. I don't mean for it to be onerous, but that's my comment.
Well, thank you. Any other discussion? Suggestions? Yes.
I'd be willing, as the maker of the motion, to add in a third stipulation that the owners maintain stabilization of the site during construction. And that should cure all our issues.
Is a second okay with that? I forget who seconded it.
It's Greg.
Greg?
Oh, yes, second to, yeah, sorry.
Okay. We have a revised motion, revised second. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? None. You are approved. We have a public hearing, request of Tom and Angela Mita as owners and applicants for property at 81 Taft Road. requesting a wetland conditional use permit approval under 10-10-17 of the zoning ordinance for 17 square feet of permanent disturbance to the buffer area. The construction of an expansion to the existing structure. This property is on Assessor's Map 247, Lot 87, and lies within the single residence SRB district. Who is here to speak to this application?
Hello, members of the board. My name is Dave Cicalone. I am the general contractor on the project, and I'm also a hydrogeologist. We had a land use application in for the addition at Tom and Angela Maida's house. The overall footprint is 14 by about 17 and a half feet. We were in front of the Conservation Commission last month where they, I guess what's the formal term, did they recommend approval with 2 stipulations that we follow the New England Organic Farmer Standards and put some wetland buffer plantings along the edge of the foundation. The way the addition is situated, it is 17 square feet that will be impacting the 100-foot wetland buffer that originates from the north side of Elwyn Road. So it's a fairly small impact at 17 square feet.
Any questions of the applicant? Yes.
I got one, Chairman. Thank you. The second stipulation, add additional wetland buffer plantings. Just curious what your thoughts are as far as additional plantings to be added.
Yeah, sure. Tom and Angela, they actually have foundation plantings around pretty much the entire perimeter of the house at this point. The way the addition's situated on that north side, it'll continue. It would be logical to just continue that foundation planting row right down along the footprint of the addition. So that the small, I guess when you're looking at it, the little jog out towards Elwyn is just a small gable detail. We actually kind of situated that to bifurcate the wetland buffer. So essentially only the water on that easterly side goes to that corner. So, you know, you were talking in a 3-inch rainstorm, approximately like 30 gallons of water running into that corner. I mean, we backfill from the footings up with crushed stone, washed stone. So, I mean, the void space in that alone would be more than substantial by like a factor of 3 to handle all the water coming off that roof line at that portion. So any additional wetland buffer planting, I think, would be more than adequate to handle any water running off that building.
Okay, thank you.
Just one comment, Vice Chair Clark. After this was published and it wasn't part of the stipulation, I did speak with Peter Britz, who said that they anticipate reviewing those additional plantings. I have it in my notes that it'll be subject to our environmental planner review of those as well. So we can amend that to make sure, but that was our intention, that actually be subject to staff review. I appreciate the explanation, but certainly there'll be staff verification of that as well.
Can I ask a question? With that process, would that be something that I guess we get communicated during the building permit review, what they're going to require?
So when you submit for your building permit and you have your plans, you would go ahead and update the plans, and then what would happen is that our development compliance review would take those over and make sure that they are okay per our environmental planner. They'll take a look at those.
Okay, like the types of plants are suitable, et cetera.
Yeah,
Great.
just update your plans as you submit those, and then he'll just verify. Mhm.
Great, easy enough.
Any other questions for the applicant? I believe this is a public hearing. Being no other questions, I'll open the public hearing. Anybody here or on Zoom wish to speak to, for, or against this application? Nobody on Zoom? I'll close the public hearing. What's the pleasure of the board?
Mr. Chairman, I'll make a motion we vote to find that the application meets the criteria set forth in 10.1017.50 and to grant the wetland conditional use permit with the following stipulations 1.1 and 1.2. However, I'd like to revise 1.2 to read, the applicant will add additional wetland buffer plantings subject to staff review.
Second.
Would you like to explain? I think it's pretty self-explanatory.
Sure, I think the applicant did a great job kind of explaining how they're going to take care of the second stipulation there, and also, once again, it's a pretty small impact to the actual wetland buffer with the the physical wetland actually being completely across on the other side of the intersection. So anything that they do should help their small portion of the wetland buffer.
Not related to this, but to me, this is sort of an impact that we might have a different set of criteria for future if we consider changes to the ordinance. So, just an aside. Any other discussion? A motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye. Aye.
Opposed? None? You're approved.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. I lost my place. There we are. We have a public hearing regarding Fritz Family Revocable Living Trust as owner for property at 0 Patricia Drive, requesting a wetland conditional use permit approval under 10-10-17 of the zoning ordinance to replace an existing unfinished right-of-way with a new private road access to 2 lots, as well as installation of a stormwater treatment infrastructure and wetland buffer plantings, which will result in 1,738 square feet of temporary impact and 4,283 square feet of permanent impact to the wetlands buffer. This property is on Assessor's Map 283, Lot 1, and lies in the Single Residence A SRA District. Who's here to speak to this application?
Good evening, Mike Garapi with Garapi Planning Consultants, and Kevin Baum is here to assist if needed. We were before this board, and Beverly, if you want to jump in at any time, but we were before the board in February of 2021 for this same application. We've been working diligently with planning staff and with the legal department to finalize the approvals for this project, and unknowingly, our error, the timeline got away from us and the clock expired on the conditional use permit. I know you have the extension request next on your agenda to deal with extending our subdivision approval as well, but so this is essentially a reapproval of a conditional use permit for the road, the proposed road impacts. We have our DES permit for the prime wetland buffer impacts. We're not actually impacting any wetlands themselves, just the prime wetland buffer. We have Conservation Commission recommendation to approve the CUP. And if you want a just brief rundown of what we're actually doing, I can do that if you're familiar. So Patricia Drive, formerly Patricia Drive, I suppose we can call it now, right off Martha Terrace, which is off of Ocean Road. It is a former paper street. I hesitate to what to call it, but it is an actual roadway. There's there's pavement, there's drainage, there's catch basins in the street. It's a small cul-de-sac configuration right now that accesses the parcel that we have ownership of, and we did receive planning board approval and for both the conditional use permit for the basically rebuilding the road that's there now, but not quite as wide. It's about 24 feet of pavement now. It's all grown over with grass and it's breaking up. It's in rather poor condition, so we're basically going to remove the existing asphalt and repave it with an 18-foot wide private roadway, and I think we're there. At least I hope we're there, Beverly. So I don't know if I can answer any questions, but it's essentially a reapproval, and it's our only access to the parcel, so we believe we meet all the requirements for granting the CUP, and I would answer any questions for you.
Any questions on the applicant?
Since it's the first time I saw it. Fire department, everybody's happy with it?
Yeah, this is all gone, vetted through TAC, everybody's happy. Happy may not be the right word, but everyone's.
So it's going to be shared road by the two eventual
Correct.
houses, but at
Absolutely.
the end of the road.
Yes.
And there's
yes.
going to be some sort of a maintenance agreement, that kind of
The
thing.
road maintenance agreement already been drafted, I think already approved by legal and in the planning department. Everything's sort of ready, I think at this point now, to be finalized, so.
I feel I owe it to Mike to say that he narrowly missed the extension submittal date, but those are the rules, and
Okay.
so he was required to go through the process again, so.
That won't happen again for me. anyway.
Yeah, I don't think it will, because you know that I mean to keep that rule.
Note to self.
So,
Jim?
Sure, Mr. Garpy, this property must have some type of interesting history, because you're right, it's been paved, it's crumbling, it's overgrown. So at some point in the distant past, this was set up to be developed, and then it just stopped. And so does this private road just only serve the lots you're proposing here?
that is correct, yep.
And-
And the abutting lot, it's lot 10 on the tax map. So it does, there's a driveway that's off of this roadway that accesses an existing home.
Okay, so that's how it's currently being used?
Correct,
For
yep.
one property?
Well, for 2 properties, and then the planning board did approve a 2-lot subdivision. So it will ultimately be 3 properties that will be utilizing the roadway. There was an old plan, I think it was, I want to say it was in the late 60s approved.
Right.
And there was a future connection, yeah, I'm not sure if you can't really see it on the locus, but this Patricia Drive, I'm going to get this right. So this cul-de-sac was sort of a phase 1 construction.
Yeah.
It was intended to continue through the abutting parcels and then connect back out to Patricia Drive, which is out on this side of Martha Terrace.
Okay.
That's why it's shown as Patricia Drive on your tax maps and things of that nature.
So you think this might go back to the late 60s?
I believe it was sometime in the...
We did look at the original plat, and not to jump ahead, but has a companion document that's coming up after this. We did not put them together. That is an extension request. He did get that in before the deadline, but yes, we think that it was dedicated, but we have done our research and never really accepted not fully constructed or maintained by the city.
Okay. And when this is completed, it will become a city street?
It will not. It'll be maintained as a private street.
All right, okay.
Yep.
See, the reason I didn't want to waste everyone's time talking about this, but the reason the history is important, because it doesn't appear you have much choice of where you put this road. Because
Correct.
it was an established private right-of-way from the mid-60s, and where you put pavement is pretty locked in.
It is, and in fact, it's locked in for other reasons too, just environmental constraints with the prime wetland. So it sort of needs to go where it's going.
Okay, thanks.
Any other questions of the applicant? Being none, I open the public hearing on this first part of this application. Anybody here wish to speak to, for, or against this application? Anybody on Zoom? Last call. Anybody here to speak to, for, or against this application? I'll close the public hearing.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make a motion that we vote to find that the application meets the criteria set forth in 10.1017.50 and grant the wetland conditional use permit with the following 1.1 and 1.2 stipulations that are in the memo.
Second. Any discussion?
I said a lot 2 years ago. I think I'm done.
Any other discussion? Are we ready for a vote? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Wetlands conditional use permit is granted. We now have, this is not a public hearing, correct?
It is an extension request. It is not a public
Extension
hearing.
request. We have a request now also related to this property for subdivision extension request. It's explained in your applications, the next set of plans. Quite a bit of history, a lot of staff and applicant time been spent on this, I know, and I know just a little tiny bit about it, but it's been, you guys have worked pretty hard on this. One of the issues that came about the other day was just making sure that the plan would have frontage for the lots, and that's more a labeling issue than anything else. I think that's been addressed, so if you'd like to explain it.
Yeah, I think we're almost there. I think we've added a couple final notes. I think the staff is recommending 3 additional, or at least a couple additional notes be added to the plat. Actually, just one. And That's just about, retaining rights for access over the roadway. So I think the notes have been added that planning and legal were looking for. It was a long sort of several-month process that we've been going through to kind of figure out exactly how the notes and the plat should be shown for recordation. So I think we're there. And I think we just need that little additional time to get us to the final, to get it to be recorded.
We did, Mr. Chairman, we did recommend one additional note. I think that actually Mr. Garapi has actually already sent an updated plan, but it's not part of your packet that reflects this, but update the call-out note above private street to read former Patricia Drive, proposed private street, see right-of-way notes 2 and 3, where it currently reads former Patricia Drive, private right-of-way easement. And so we're asking just for that correction so that it's clearly identified as a private street.
And we have made that change on the plans, which we will upload once we make the final edits as well.
Are we ready?
Any questions about this one? We have a planning department recommendation.
I make a motion that we vote to grant the extension to the planning board approval for preliminary and final plat approval with the included stipulations and anything else that the planning department spoke about.
Second.
Just now.
Second.
We already have that in the action sheet too.
And this will take us to next month.
Right. Correct. Yeah.
Any discussion?
It's pretty short and sweet.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? You're approved.
You're free to go.
You're free to go.
Have fun.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Have a great night.
Okay.
Can't imagine how many reasons to have a line here for the last 2 years.
Should I call Luke up?
Yep.
Give a preamble.
I certainly can do it. I can introduce him. So,
We
so-
have
go ahead.
public involvement summary report.
So look, if you don't mind coming up, I think I'd like to introduce, and I think he's perfectly capable of introducing himself as well. Lucas Cowan is our summer intern, a student at the University of Virginia. He has worked really closely with staff in the public engagement, executing the public involvement plan for the accessory dwelling units, which are the Phase 2 amendments that will be coming before this planning board late summer. We have all let him go through all the components of that public involvement plan and the results. So, Lucas.
Good evening. My name is Luke Cowan, and I'm an intern at the City Planning Office for the summer. And this is a presentation on the Public Involvement Summary Report for accessory dwelling units. Next slide, please. On April 13th, the Land Use Committee transmitted the 2022 Regulatory Work Plan to the City Council for approval. In the April 18th, 2022 regular meeting, the City Council approved the 2022 Regulatory Work Plan, which included 3 phases: code cleanup, accessory dwelling unit amendments, and incentive amendments, with the primary objective of increasing workforce housing. Phase 1 is zoning ordinance cleanups, which are currently being reviewed by the Planning Board. Phase 2 are amendments to accessory dwelling unit regulations, which are currently being drafted. And Phase 3 are amendments to city incentives to promote the development of more workforce housing. And this presentation is focused on Phase 2 amendments and public input we have received to date. Next slide, please. Here are the 3 steps for Phase 2 public involvement, and today we will be primarily focused on steps 1 and 2. Step 1 was to conduct small focus group meetings over Zoom with 4 groups, which included previous ADU applicants, architects, engineers, and neighborhood representatives. Each group gave unique insights into the process of building ADUs, and many significant quotes from these meetings will be included throughout this presentation. These focus group meetings were conducted over the course of 2 weeks between the dates of June 9th and June 15th. And then for the next step, we conducted ADU direct abutter surveys. We mailed the survey out to over 200 direct abutters of ADUs in Portsmouth on June 22nd, and since then we have received 27 responses. 5 of the 27 respondents were not aware of an ADU near them, and we are aware that the sample size is rather low, but with a response rate of over 10%, we would consider this a successful survey. This survey was also very targeted towards residents who were directly impacted by ADUs. The third step is public hearings and meetings. And then for reference, here's a map of 25 ADUs that have pulled a building permit in the Portsmouth area since 2017. You're good. Yeah, next slide.
Excuse me, can you just repeat that last sentence?
Yeah, so there was just a map on the slide. It was just a reference of, so those are 25 ADUs that have pulled a building permit in the Portsmouth area since 2017. And then, yeah, next slide. We've determined 6 emerging themes from the input and data we have gathered. Process navigational support is needed. Dimensional relief is both an obstacle and a protection. There's considerable cost and risk in the process, and this is a deterrent. Regulations for ADUs need to be clear and implementable. Foremost among abutters' concerns are parking, short-term rentals, neighborhood character, and buffering and separation. And abutters were generally positive about ADUs. Next slide. ADU applicants who participated in the focus group meeting described how complicated it was to navigate the various regulations. Participants indicated that the hardest part was just knowing where to get started. There's no step-by-step process for how to get it done, and some applicants hired attorneys or architects to help navigate the process, further increasing the cost of an already expensive project. A member from the ADU applicants focus group said that it's like hitting a fly ball to midfield while describing the process. Next slide. Many architects from the focus group observed that because of Portsmouth's tight development pattern, zoning relief was often needed. Setback relief in particular was often required for continued use of the backyard. In many instances, the unit size limitations have made the conversion from a garden cottage to a livable space more challenging. We heard from the neighborhood representative focus group that privacy is important to them. The current zoning ordinance provides protection when addressing the separation requirements, and in most cases, the square footage maximums are the smallest possible according to New Hampshire state law. One Portsmouth architect stated that accessory building garages do not meet the standards for a living unit. The 600 square foot limitation needs to be loosened. Next slide. The architects and engineers who participated in the focus group meetings addressed the risk that comes when applying for variances or modification. Focus group participants indicated that the cost can run as high as $20,000 for land use approvals, and approval is never guaranteed. This may deter potential applicants by making the process more expensive and not guaranteeing the approval of a planned ADU. One architect from the focus group, when describing the difficulties of applying for an ADU, said that when we present the feasibility study and present the findings, people have a hard time moving forward with the uncertainties. Next slide. The ADU applicant focus group indicated that more clarity is needed in the zoning ordinance for terms such as subordinate to the principal structure and architecturally compatible. Participants stated that these terms are not only very subjective, but hard to define and therefore hard to interpret. The terminology used should be clear and specific so everyone is able to understand and follow the zoning ordinance provided. This is also important for abutters so they can expect consistent application of the regulations. A member from the neighborhood representative focus group stated that if this is going to be rewritten, the intent needs to be clearly addressed when describing the current zoning ordinance. This is some of the data we have gathered from the ADU Direct Abutter Survey. The question asked here was, of the following impacts, which are you the most concerned about? Check the 3 that are most important. 63% of respondents identified short-term rentals as a concern, while 41% identified parking. Next slide. The question asked here was, the city is thinking about allowing some ADUs to be approved without planning board review or a public hearing if the project can meet some minimum standards. Which standards are most important to you? Please check 4 boxes below. 74% were concerned about buffering and separation, 70% were concerned with parking, and 70% were concerned about neighborhood character. Next slide. Survey respondents were given the chance to write about the positive or negative impacts of ADUs in their neighborhoods. 65% of the comments were neutral or positive, while 35% were negative. All of the comments are from respondents who were aware of ADUs in their neighborhoods. While we felt like it was important to note that many of the comments were positive, we believe that there is rich information that can be provided from the negative comments as well. We chose to include a negative comment that summarized the experience of those who identified negative impacts. The respondent replied, "It does not fit in the neighborhood, towers over my property, and lights shine in my backyard. I greatly regret writing a letter for my neighbor to help him along the process." And then 48% of the survey respondents would consider building an ADU on their own property. Next slide. In the architect's focus group, one of the members stated that what accessory dwelling units are really for: single people and sometimes their partner. The minimum lot size has to be chopped in half or a third. The lot size requirements in place don't exist very often. You really have to get lucky to have had that lot for years. This focus group member was describing one of the biggest struggles with even getting started on an ADU, which is the lot size requirement. Next slide. In the ADU applicants focus group, one of the members stated that if you really want to make this process work, you need to make it idiot-proof. This member is describing what many others in that focus group described, which was the vague language and difficulty with the process of building an ADU. Next slide. Thank you for listening, and if you have any questions, feel free to ask, and Beverly and I will do our best to answer.
Thank you, Luke.
Well done.
Good job, Luke.
Yes.
Are we discussing this?
Yeah.
Nice job. Really nice job presenting. I think mine are more observations, and there are so many different approaches here, but down all the way at the bottom, it references Seattle and having a pre-approved design that architects have already looked at and supported, and then the city then chimes in on. And then it goes on to say that the term architecturally compatible requires professional support, and that is subjective, which is very true, and I think is also required. So although I am for this push and movement, I would also suggest that Portsmouth is very architecturally diverse in a way. So to prevent neighbors from hating each other, it may be best to not have something like that, because the approval process allows sort of that input process. Obviously, that's why we're here. But nonetheless, I think that one of the points up here had said, the 300 square foot studio attached to our existing home for future ground floor living for us in the future. Until that time, we are renting it out. That alone is worth its weight in gold, because that's how we help the aging population that we have here in Portsmouth maintain their livability and functionality. And just recently I came across a conversation where the guy is now selling his house due to necessity, because he's now immobile. So this future proof and kind of the versatility and adaptability is, I think, a point of emphasis for me. Now I know that this also focuses quite a bit on the cost, and I would say that if we can streamline that, whether it's a public hearing process combined with a pre-approval checklist, that may help remove some time, so that it not only takes it off our agendas here in this realm, but also helps the public then understand the steps to get it. And I know that city staff is already overwhelmed, but having somebody dedicated to that seems like the go-to answer, and I don't know how that is achieved.
Can I add to that? Having worked in this town as a contractor, he just hit, the last thing he said was that we need a liaison, because
That's the word.
when you go to the city, you hit, what's her name at the desk, the little lady that just got an assistant at the building department? Anyhow, but she's like
Mary
kind
Lou
of
or Deb, it could be, there's a couple folks
she's,
who work up there.
well, the one that's been there forever. She was kind of like the go-to guiding the process for anything I'd ever did in the town, you know, including a waterfront historic renovation. And you never really had somebody to ask. You had to figure out, well, who am I supposed to pitch this question to? does this question go where? And it could hit a whole bunch of different departments. And this, I know you guys will clean it up because he made some great suggestions.
Yeah.
But then figure out a point of contact for the average civilian who's trying to do this. And I agree with his comment about the 600 square feet, because I have a wonderful 380-foot studio with a loft, which there was some issue about the loft, that I rent very easily because people like the minimalist type downsize apartment. It's popular now.
I appreciate those comments. Thank you.
Ms. Jane?
Yeah, I have a couple of comments, and some of them are more macro. Thank you very much, Lucas. You did a great presentation. Thank you for doing all of this work. I think on behalf of the Land Use Committee. So one of my comments is about what the stated goal is here for this. According to our materials, we're saying that the goal as set in the regulatory work plan, I believe, is to remove barriers and expand the number of eligible properties for ADUs and senior housing facilities. And because that goal is very general, it doesn't say to what extent, it doesn't say to what density, it doesn't talk about issues of infill that are really quite controversial as you walk the streets of Portsmouth. And so I think that there needs to be clarity, bringing a goal around that topic more specifically into the master plan. And otherwise, how do we know when we've achieved the goal? I mean, to just have more, to have lots more. There's 35% of your 27 respondents saying that they feel very negatively, actually, about their abutters of ADUs, and there were 24% who were neutral. So that means there's only 41% of your responding abutters who are actually positive. So it's enough to, like, take a pause, take a moment. And I feel strongly that the general public, the taxpayers of Portsmouth, should have a lot of say, and that there should be further public conversations about what kind of density we are collectively trying to achieve. So that's my first comment. My second one is about the process thus far. And I don't know who to direct this comment to. I'm going to actually direct this question to you, Chairman, and you can decide where it goes, because I keep looking at this process and not seeing, other than some comments, the fact that we are now informed as a planning board, how this is not actually subverting one of the critical roles of planning boards. When you turn to the Office of Strategic Initiatives, Chapter 3, regulatory functions of the planning board, on page 8, it says, regardless of how the zoning amendment is initiated. So once we get through this, well, let me outline what the process, as I understand it, is now from the materials we've been given. So the Land Use Committee developed a 2022 regulatory work plan and sent it to the City Council, which approved it. Now, it is true we have 2 members of the Planning Board on the Land Use Committee. That's a representation. You don't necessarily know how the individual members of the Planning Board feel about anything in that regulatory work plan. Then, the Land Use Committee developed the Public Involvement Plan. That's great. I think the facilitated discussions are good input. Then they issue the Public Involvement Summary Report, but it's not clear to me that, other than being informed, that the Planning Board will have any opportunity. I have specific suggestions about how I think we could get around some of the things that have been mentioned in your report. I don't know that I have that possibility of doing that now. Then there still is outstanding question for me, which will persist until I understand it. about where and how the planning board gets to have role and input to develop, review, and recommend changes in our zoning or land use regulations per this regulatory chapter of our guiding RSA 4, which says that regardless of how the zoning amendment is initiated, so all of these processes, fine, and there are ways that citizens can bring their own initiation of a zoning amendment forward, it must be voted on at a town meeting or in a manner prescribed in the municipal charter. In all three situations, the planning board must hold a public hearing with prior notice as provided in RSA 675-7. After the public hearing, the planning board must, by vote, determine the final form of the ordinance amendment or amendments to be presented to the voters. If after the public hearing, the planning board makes substantive changes to the proposed zoning amendment, it must hold a second public hearing. So I want to make sure that we are on board with where the planning board is involved in next steps toward the end that I just read from our regulatory guidance. It's not clear to me what happens next here. I mean, these draft amendments are going to be presented to the city council, then somehow it comes back to the planning board. But,
Well, if I
but
can- if-
it's already a draft amendment by the time it comes back to the planning board. So how is the planning board actually doing its core work of drafting amendments and presenting them as recommendation to the city council?
I've touched on this a little bit before, but to restate some of that and also to address your points, I hope, or I'll try. First of all, if you have specific ideas with regarding to some of the issues Luke raised in his presentation, tonight is a good night to talk about those. The statute that you're citing, most of the state of New Hampshire is towns, not cities. And I've been on a town planning board versus a city planning board. It's very different. And in a town, the planning board has the only role in presenting zoning amendments to the voters. There's no other way to do it. If the petition has to go to the planning board. Planning board wants to do it itself, has to go to the planning board. Selectmen think it's a good idea, has to go to the planning board. Here, the planning board, of its own volition, can come up with a proposal for a zoning amendment. Or Luke could present something, or, members of the audience, we can get a petition, or the city council can do it. It still comes to the planning board, but ultimately, it doesn't go to the voters until it goes to the council. The council actually goes through the process of presenting it in form of hearings, and then the council votes on it. It's not a citywide vote on a zoning ordinance. So it's a different process, but it's a parallel track. We're doing what we're doing, and I've talked about other things that this board could be doing. If this board wants to jump in and look at other things like the master plan or parking regulations or other things, I'm all for it. It's more work, more meetings. So we can do that. This is something that was identified by council as an important priority, and that's one of the things that the land use committee's been doing, sort of attempting to be a fast track, if you will, to get it here for us to talk about and to see things. Now, when I'm listening to Luke's presentation and Andrew's comments and your comments, I'm thinking things like, this could benefit a lot from some graphics. A lot. Not just words, but graphics in a proposal that makes it idiot-proof, so that the homeowners can come in and say, here's something, we don't necessarily need a liaison officer for something that's really simple. We've got something that's, it fits this checklist, it looks like this thing on page 4. Those things have been presented to the public as a part of these public hearings that we're talking about. I think there's a way to make a simple application facilitated that fits the goals, involves this board very much in creating those regulations, and goes to the council for the final council action. I hesitate, it's easy to think that the council's trying to cut the planning board out, I think the council is trying to augment the planning board with this part of something they identified as something that has been, it's needed statewide, it's needed nationwide. It's really hard, it's a difficult problem. Many jurisdictions are looking at it. So, by all means, please, if you have ideas about how we can do it, let's do it together. And it's not a competition. So, there are other things if you want to talk about as a part of this or related to it, let's talk about them. But I hope that helps a little bit.
Mr. Chairman, if I could also add, I do think that part of the purpose of the regulatory work plan is to help manage the staff workload. We spend, I'd say that 85–90% of our time is, we have 4 boards, we have split agendas almost in every board in the past few months, is to manage development review. This helps set a cadence for staff and we have support with Loop this summer. We also have some professional consultant support. These are labor and good public outreach that I think that is being represented tonight is labor intensive. This started a couple months ago, getting these meetings set up, queued up, questions, working with public information, getting the survey out, compiling the report, which is a beautiful report if you didn't get a chance to look at it. And so I think it's partly to help us manage our work plan because regulatory amendments, they always seem small, but they are, like, every one of them ends up being open heart surgery. It seems like they're intensive, they're hard. We always think, oh, this is a quick fix. This is easy. This is a cleanup, but it ends up being more intensive than that. So these are big lifts done well with good public outreach, good summary, good guidance for the community, we hope to bring a table that shows the amendments and how they were informed by what kinds of comments as you work to refine these amendments, because that is your job, is to refine the amendments as they come to you. So that is a very staff-intensive prospect, and that's, I hope I'm not speaking in turn, but I think that, for me, it's been very helpful that the council establishes, through the city manager, the staff work plan.
Just to add to that, so the whole point of bringing all this information to you is that if you do have ideas, to get them to the land use committee, because they're going to, or to staff so they can bring them to us, because we are, staff's working on with a consultant the red lines now based off of the information that's come in. So the direction that we want them to go is, this information's been presented now. You'll be the 3rd group that's heard this information and received it. So we're going to look at the red lines, which once we feel like they're in a motion to set them forward, City Council will get them to review and refer back to here. And at the planning board level, that will be when those red lines, we can pick them apart, change them, review them. You can have a work session on them. We have to have a public hearing on them. And then we make a vote of recommendation back to the City Council where they're reviewed again. There's another public hearing. There's a first reading, a second reading, public hearing, and a third reading before they actually get enacted. So there are many steps to the review of every single ordinance that we work on. So we're just trying to keep the ball flowing, but keeping you involved as far as all the information that we are trying to gather from the public so that we have a good idea about where Portsmouth sits. One of the questions that we put out there to some of these groups were, do you read ordinances in other communities that would be helpful to make ours better? And I was shocked to hear that there aren't. There wasn't a single community anyone could point us to. And I thought that was very telling, that clearly we already have done a good job, but I think we could do a much better job. So I think that all of your input is important in order for us to get this formulated and drafted so that it can be reviewed. So submit them verbally tonight. If you want to think about it, write it down. You can send them all to the city staff, and then they can put those all together.
Jim, then Andrew, then Greg.
Luke, nice job. Probably never gets old hearing that, I bet. Anyway, I have a question about the history. The ADU ordinance started in 2017, is that true?
Yes, sir. Yep.
And about 60 have been approved?
I think it's only been 31 since 2017 have been approved.
I thought 31 have been built. Only 31 ADUs have been approved.
Yes.
And do you know how many have been built?
There have been 25. Those are the ones I show on the screen that have pulled a building permit.
Okay, all right. And the other question I had is, you mentioned the word uncertainty a lot as far as a drawback for the owners or anyone's involved. Is that financial uncertainty? Is it approval uncertainty?
I think it's both financial uncertainty and also approval uncertainty when applying for a variance. There's a risk that comes with that. And especially the architects mentioned how when they presented the feasibility studies to some of their clients, they just didn't want to go through with the process because of both the risk and the cost.
But don't we have like an 80 or 90, 95% approval rate for ADUs?
I'd have to double check that. I'm not sure.
But it's high.
It's
I mean,
high.
It's uncertain. I can see on financial uncertainty, but having 90% approval rate is pretty good odds, I would think.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
I think we had actually one that went for variance last month and did not make it. So I think maybe there is a small uncertainty, although not as great, maybe as some might think, but given the cost, maybe there. But we did hear that. That was part of what we heard.
It's also perception versus reality. When you're looking at an ordinance that requires a lot of submission, it's not a guarantee. It seems risky to many people. Even at 90% seems risky. You done, Jim?
Yeah.
Thanks.
All set, Jim?
Yep, set.
Yeah, and I think even certainty aside, it's still very cost-intensive, time-intensive, and a large undertaking to go through that, certainly if you're not familiar with how the process works and you just get thrown into it and you're there. I have a lot of thoughts, but I think primarily the two highlights would be you don't want ADUs to become a workaround for getting more square footage approved on your lot, and then someone else moving, or you selling the house with that additional square footage, and then it becomes misconstrued, and it's like, oh, we have an ADU, but it's just really a lot more square footage, and it's a master wing or whatever, it ends up being. So that's a hurdle in my mind that we want to be aware of. And then the second thing is need versus want. And so is it a need because of mobility issues, or, there are probably a couple, but mobility issues come to mind only because of the average age here in town and whatnot. So is it a need because of that, or is it a want because of the income? And so I feel as though that has an influence. Where that influence lies within this approval process that we're discussing here tonight, I don't know quite yet, but to me that may have an impact, because if someone is just wanting to build an additional 400 square feet on their home, and then they decide that they were going to collect a $1,500 check every month, I don't know if that stands out in my mind as much as a mobility issue, much like the 300 square foot studio that someone is building on because they want to be living in that house for the duration of their life. So I don't know quite how that balances out, or if it does at all. So I'm still trying to determine that among some other things. So just thoughts.
Greg.
A lot of very complex issues, and this report is fantastic. We just need to take it apart and pick direction, theme, take it down from 100 points to 10 that we can work with. But I find it interesting that they spent a lot of time on a public involvement summary report on this, which is a very important issue. But we didn't have this on like the building height issue and this other stuff that we're trying to chew on that seems to have been half-baked when we got it. This type of information, talking to the abutters, talking to developers, talking to people that are either for or against all the changes we're trying to make without a whole lot of hard input, would have, this is the framework. This is a great piece to start the changes for the ADU zoning changes. And it kind of feels like if we would have had this, it would have given us a good starting point as to why are we trying to address the other stuff we're addressing. This is a wonderful starting point. Thank you for whoever cooked it up. This is great work, and he did a good job, and whoever told him to do it did a good job. So thank you. No, this will be something we can work from.
Yeah. Jane made a good point that it's a technical question that actually came to my mind when you made the point about master plan, and it ties into what you were just saying. The other zoning amendments that we're talking about are directly tied to the master plan process. So there was a master plan process that created the maps that are now being amended. They're not being created anew. That's the difference. So the reason that I would challenge, you like the term half-baked.
Sorry, it's,
They needed work, all this stuff is complicated, as several people have said, this stuff is complicated, we have to get it right. And that's why we have these meetings, to talk about it. So that's the big difference, though. The other amendments are following the master plan process. I don't know that the master plan provides the right foundation for what we're doing with ADUs. Do we need to consider that?
We did pull all the city council goals and master plan goals as part of that original. You may recall how they aligned with all the master plan and.
So you feel you got the foundation there?
We were talking about all of those about the same time frame, if I remember, but I think the master plan was actually done just after we finished the ADUs, the original ADU ordinance as it sits today, if I remember correctly.
And sorry, Jane, you had your hand up.
Yeah, it is back to the master plan because I think, I don't know, when I look at the master plan, and I was involved with the master plan, so I'm complaining about, things that are missing in something that I looked at and reviewed. I don't see enough specificity about these questions of density, because as a planning board, when we see ADU by ADU and we have like our 90% approval rating, we can be, happy about that. But we're looking at it project by project, and we're not looking at the cumulative effect. We're not looking at questions about managing growth. It's certainly ADU and that type of infill and other types of infill. It's part of it. It's not the whole bucket. Should be looked at strategically about how much density is acceptable, is needed because of housing issues, and is acceptable to the people who are paying taxes in this town. And I don't think it's in our master plan. I think it's a real priority for, I think it's the planning board looking at that issue, or, suggesting a revised master plan that includes more specificity, more detail, a clearer, measurable objective around density, some rate of growth. I don't know. I don't know specifically what it would be, but it's hard to find in between the pages of our current master plan. I also really wanted to ask how the people who were chosen for participants, how they were chosen. I mean, there are 40 total, and then you have another group of 27 abutters, I believe, who participated, because you said you had that 10%. In the 40, you have 8 engineers, you have 7 architects, you have 10 applicants for ADUs, different types of ADUs, and 5 neighborhood representatives. So I'm wondering how those specific 40 people, which is not a huge denominator, how they were chosen. And then I have a comment about how I think it can be improved in terms of being able to apply for ADUs, but I wanted to ask that first.
Luke, would you like to?
Yes, yeah. I came on right as we were doing as we were starting the Zoom meeting, so I didn't really, I went to the Zoom meetings, but that was my first week.
Okay, sorry.
We had already put those together.
Yeah, I did more of the.
I'm happy to take that one on. So for engineers and architects, we started to put together a list of people who come before these boards all the time. So we were trying to look at a cross-section of ones that are, I'll say, repeat customers. They're engineers and architects who end up before, the HGC and all these different boards, because we know they deal with our specific zoning a lot. So in that respect, that's who we were looking at. We looked to the land use committee to actually give us recommendations on people in the community as well. For the abutters, that was sent to every abutter. So every abutter of an existing one. The neighborhood ones, I actually went to the citywide neighborhood committee and asked to reach out to their contact list, which really only gave me 1 or 2. So we ended up just sort of by word of mouth trying to ask who, we were looking for different people in different neighborhoods that are somewhat outspoken as far as, being involved. And so we tried to create a list of people that we knew are involved and pay attention and would be a valued asset in knowing a specific neighborhood in the city. So that's how that all came together. Was that all of them? Did I miss any?
Applicants?
Applicants, right. We also wanted to take a thank you, I forgot about applicants themselves. We wanted to take a cross-section of people who have applied, so we drew up a list of just some garden cottages, some detached, and some attached ADUs. We were trying to keep the numbers to 10 or under, just because if you have too many people in those groups, when you're going through a lot of questions, it can become too much, and in some cases, people just didn't get back to us. So it was the ones that could make it and make the time frame that we were trying to set these up in like a 2-week period of time, so.
Thanks. And then, in terms of, what I could see happening going forward is, it's really sad to hear that, so many of the respondents, particularly abutters, are concerned about things like short-term rentals, like situations getting out of control, like the one abutter who said, I actually helped the application of my neighbor, and now I've got noise, and I've got traffic, and I've got that's obviously, we don't want that kind of situation, and we don't want it repeated throughout Portsmouth. I don't know how we address that issue. I am just really concerned about it, as we, continue to find applications for ADUs, but if we are really trying to increase ADU applications by the average citizen, the average layperson, who should not have to require, particularly a lawyer, to, fill out paperwork in application. I mean, I don't see any reason why we can't create a toolkit that includes the checklist that someone mentioned about what needs to be included for a complete application, also includes the steps that one will go through, but includes, in a set, instructions along with paperwork that can be filled out and can make it really simple for a homeowner to, make this application. The architectural piece is another question, and I think each homeowner will have to answer that for themselves. I hadn't realized before the report, which is really interesting, that apparently there are architectural designs available online. I guess you can Google for anything online, and so they could elect to adopt that, or the applicant can seek architectural assistance in some way. And I'm sorry that there's that cost to it, but I don't think that we should have such an onerous task for application. I think there is a way to very simplify it, put the paperwork in order, have instructions for each sheet, and be able to have the average citizen be able to complete application to their city boards without the need or the people think that there's a need, that they have a lawyer for this. I think that's absolutely terrible, and that can be avoided. I think that's all I have to say right now.
Joe?
I've been concerned in the past that sometimes the ADU, it gets villainized for a lot of unfair reasons. The comments that I saw from the negative comment that I saw had nothing whatsoever to do with noise. It was aesthetic, really. It said that it towered and there was lights. I didn't see anything in that comment about parking or noise at all. And I've spoken to people that do live next to an ADU and also short-term rentals. And to them and to myself as a landlord, the bigger concern is if you sign a 1-year lease for a wild tenant that has parties every night. I mean, a short-term, so this fear that something crazy is going to happen next door to you for, a short period of time, but why isn't there such a concern for something crazy happening for a year's lease? It's kind of a strange argument. But also, when we talk about the need for ADUs, my gosh, whether it's and I'm speaking from personal experience, whether it's an aging parent or the need for a live-in care for a parent or another family member, whether it's for a child going to college or the need is very real. And I also am very sensitive to the fact when we hear people say, well, sometimes people just want to make money. Well, there's nothing wrong with making money. There's nothing wrong with generating income from an ADU to pay your taxes and to pay your bills and so forth. I think that's one of the reasons why the ADU was created. There's a need to generate income specifically for maybe people who have a burdensome, the tax bills are getting larger and so forth, and we don't want to relocate people out of their homes. I'm just very concerned about, when I sense sometimes that the existence of ADUs gets villainized, and I don't think I think we do need to simplify the process. There's no question about it, but this is a positive thing in my opinion.
I have some thoughts, but Corey had his hand up.
Yeah, just I'll keep it brief. You know, one thing I think we just want to keep in mind and in context when we're reviewing all these the ADUs and coming up with amendments is that, you know, we got to keep property rights in mind. Certainly, you know, there's a lot of instances when someone could buy a relatively small house, demo that house, quadruple the size of the house, and the abutters have no input whatsoever. They're completely within the zoning and everything else. That may be way more impactful than one of these small 600 square foot ADUs going in. And so I think we just have to keep in mind that, you know, abutters certainly provide a valuable input, great input. You know, I think everybody deserves the right to, you know, be heard, but at the same time, it is property rights, and, you know, people have the right to do what they choose with the property as long as it's in accordance with the applicable zoning and laws and everything else. So trying to, you know, get that balance, and the fact that, you know, we're talking about homeowners, residents. It's not like we're talking about, you know, huge developments that, you know, that have the financial backing to do this, and, you know, have all the everything else to pull off, you know, very you know, when we apply various stipulations, or we have other criteria that they have to meet and have to abide by, or, you know, give and trade and that sort of thing. I mean, once again, that we all saw, one of the biggest hurdles here is financial. So,
Beth.
I just like to remind everyone that we are actually required under state law to have attached ADUs, right? So we can't not create that density whether we wanted to or not. We're required, we either had to accept the model that they gave us, or we could accept it and make some changes. We did add the detached ADUs in the garden cottages because we thought, based off of our makeup of our city, that might be a good thing to try to help. So I'm all on board with trying to streamline this and make it easier. That was part of getting this information and making sure we're going in the right direction. So one of the suggestions I made was that if you're going to do an attached ADU within your footprint, like nothing in the outside of your house changes, you have enough parking, then you should be able to do that based off of a checklist. And I think that we've also talked about in land use whether or not we could actually put together a handbook of some sort, so that there was you want an ADU, here's, you know, how to do it kind of thing, so that it does make it easier. Because we were astounded when I actually was the moderator for one of the groups, when they told us that they're telling some people it's $20,000 to $30,000 in order to do that. I mean, I almost fell off my seat. I was sitting down. So that's why we wanted to get this information, so that we could really make these changes. So I value everyone's
I think
input.
we'll make the handbook Luke's Christmas project when he's here for Christmas.
Come on, don't you have some time when you're at college?
Well, I think we've got a couple of options here. The Land Use Committee is working on this, as we've heard, and it's going to come back here, and there'll be a red line for us to work on. Now, some people may want to work on it before that. I think that might be premature. You know, it's going to create sort of two competing teams, if you will. Might be better to build from the work that is being put together, but I'm open to discussion before it gets too much later. I was trying to get us out of here before too late tonight. Andrew?
Are we able to sit in on the Land Use Commission meeting?
Of course.
Oh,
It's open to
sweet.
the public, and we take public comment.
Is that
So you
preferable?
can-
Is that preferable to just writing in and sending it to you?
I'd say it doesn't matter either way. Keep in mind that there are certainly some things that I think are as we pointed out, narrow this down to some things that we can do more quickly than others. So when you talk about the pre-approved plans that was brought up to us about Seattle, I actually went out and looked at those. I don't think it's impossible to do here, but I think we need to do a lot more research before something like that gets enacted.
100%.
And so it's not an idea that'll go away, but it's not an idea that's probably going to be part of this group, right? I think there are some things that are longer term changes and some things that are shorter term changes. So that's what we're trying to work through now. What can we sort of more easily implement and see how effective it can be right away. So if there's things you see or ideas about how we can change this that gets to that goal, then please tell us. I don't care how you do it, whether it's at the public hearing, whether it's right now, whether it's written, submitted to the city. Get them to us, because we are continuing to look at this. The Land Use Committee will be hopefully reviewing these on August 5th.
That's the next meeting.
Jim?
I was struck by, I think Councilman Moreau said that when you looked around other New Hampshire cities and towns for guidance and you came up empty?
No, we asked the architects and engineers if they could give us other towns they've worked in using their ADU zoning, whether or not there were models that were better or more easily used or better than what ours was, and we got a big 0.
So the take back there, I'm sorry, the takeaway is that there's nothing better out there to work off of?
Correct. That was directly quoted from architects in the group that I moderated, yeah. That we pretty much lead the way.
So our rules are the best?
Yep. It's what they tell me. I can only tell you what they told me. It's all recorded. I'm not lying about this.
I was in on that with the
480.
engineers that we asked, and I asked more than once. And even outside of the state, okay, how about Maine?
Yeah, I asked about Maine too.
And Beverly and I just got a proposed amendment for New Market, or New, I haven't had a chance to review it yet, but it's a proposal, so.
Brave new world, I guess.
Just want to compliment the city on doing a good job.
Thanks very much, Luke.
Thank you, Luke.
All right, thanks
Thank
so
you,
much.
Luke.
Appreciate it.
Thanks.
So are we good with letting this proceed through the Land Use Committee or not? I'm not, by the way, I'm not advocating to have the Land Use Committee do all the zoning amendments forever and all time. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm suggesting that it's a special circumstance, and it seems to be working, so, for that purpose. Andrew?
I'll be very brief. So my thought about proceeding it to the Land Use Committee, I think goes back to like the diversity of our neighborhoods in Portsmouth, because I go to like Tucker's Cove versus Lincoln Ave versus Maple Haven neighborhoods, right? Like just those three alone differ so much, and then you go to like Rock Creek neighborhood, Kate Street area, and so thinking about the way that we have general residence, SRA, SRB, and those types of zones, like are we looking at umbrella zoning changes, or are we looking at the ADU for this topic right now? And proceeding it to
I think it'll vary depending on zone.
The ADU, I'm pretty sure, is across zone, but it's across single-family residential zones, right? It's single-family zones.
Right. Because Corey had hit on the nonconformity of all of these situations. So.
But that might tie into how simple, certain zones might be simpler than other zones, so.
Oh, most definitely.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can tell you, because we've been working on the ordinance, that most of the changes really do impact across the board. We're not calling out, there might be some changes to the zones, but really the regulations as you see them now there's I think a couple exceptions, but tend to apply to all the zones wherever they're allowed similarly.
Okay.
Anything else on that? Okay, 2 points quickly. Some things have come up recently, and I've been talking with the planning director and other staff. There's been a request that I support to have communications. If you have a question of staff that's not something normal, responding to their request, please run it through me so I can have a look at it. And then I'll work with staff to get the correct answers back. And the other thing, just very briefly, Jim's letter to the editor today, in my opinion, that was okay because it dealt with a legislative matter. You can talk about legislative matters. We have two sets of things we do up here. Don't ever talk to an applicant outside this room about a specific application. That's wrong. It violates the right to know law. But if we're talking about zoning amendments. So if somebody sees you on the street and wants to talk about building heights or something else that's being proposed, that's a legislative matter. That's something you can talk about. Now, that being said, I would prefer, despite the exuberance of getting more public input, before we send private letters, let's talk about it here and decide about what the best course of action might be. If we're going to put an ad in the paper or maybe have a little bit more outreach, I think that would be better practice and better form and present things better to the public generally. So that's all I had for tonight.
I just have a request, a formal request through you, Mr. Chairman, to the Planning Department, that for future meetings, please, can we please use something like SurveyMonkey or the equivalent, so that we have a chance of having the most people who are really available coming to meetings? And can we have as much lead time as possible? Because now that it's a great thing. We're scheduling trainings, we're scheduling special sessions, but I'm afraid that it's really not going to work for people who have like dense schedules unless there's some upfront time and we use some kind of tool that's fair for getting the most representation from the planning board as possible. And I've asked for this a number of times.
Got it. Anything else? I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Thank you.
Thank you.